The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar tune above the San Antonio corporate offices as Susan Martinez bent over her desk, fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced precision. Most of her colleagues had abandoned their posts hours ago, eager to escape into the Texas evening. But Susan remained anchored to her workstation like a ship weathering an endless storm. The cleaning crew had already made their rounds, leaving behind the scent of industrial disinfectant and the hollow echo of empty hallways. From wherever you are watching this unfold, whether you are settling in for the night in your own office building or relaxing at home after your own long workday, you understand the weight of invisible labor. Comment below and let me know where you are watching from tonight, because Susan's story of recognition and worth resonates differently depending on whether you have felt that same exhaustion of being overlooked. 3 floors above, behind floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city skyline, Kong Min stood with his hands clasped behind his back, studying the quarterly reports that would determine the fate of dozens of employees. His tailored charcoal suit fit his frame with the precision that only custom tailoring could achieve, each line speaking to power earned through careful calculation rather than inheritance. The corner office that housed him buzzed with the quiet efficiency of hidden cameras, encrypted phones, and security measures that went far beyond what any legitimate corporation would require. Susan had no knowledge of these details as she finished formatting the final client proposal, her dark eyes scanning each line for the perfection that had become her trademark. Her supervisor had dumped the project on her desk with barely concealed irritation, muttering something about urgent deadlines and impossible expectations. Where others saw an overwhelming task, Susan saw an opportunity to demonstrate the competence that management seemed determined to ignore. The elevator chimed softly as Roxana Kim emerged onto the executive floor, her designer heels clicking against marble with the confidence of someone who had never questioned her place in the world. Her perfectly styled blonde hair caught the ambient lighting as she moved through the reception area, pausing only to check her reflection in the polished steel of the elevator doors. Tomorrow would bring the announcement she had been preparing for since joining the company, the promotion that would elevate her from senior account manager to personal assistant to the most powerful man in the building. Kong Min pressed a button on his desk intercom, his voice carrying the measured tone that made even seasoned executives listen carefully. He asked his current assistant to pull the personnel files for the candidates under consideration, though his decision had crystallized weeks ago during a late-night incident that revealed more about character than any interview process ever could. The memory played in his mind with vivid clarity. A particularly difficult client had called after hours, screaming about a contract discrepancy that threatened a multi-million-dollar deal. While the account manager responsible cowered in the break room and Roxana had already left for a social engagement, Susan had calmly taken the call. Her voice never wavered as she walked the furious client through each clause, her understanding of the complex terms revealing a depth of knowledge that surprised even Kong Min as he listened from his office extension. Susan saved her work and finally allowed herself a moment to stretch, rolling her shoulders against the tension that had built throughout another 14-hour day. Her modest apartment waited across town, where leftover takeout and another evening of solitude beckoned. She had learned not to expect recognition for her contributions, had trained herself to find satisfaction in work well done rather than praise that never came. The next morning arrived with Texas sunshine streaming through the office windows and the usual bustle of corporate ambition filling every corridor. Roxana had chosen her outfit with particular care, selecting the navy blue dress that complemented her figure while projecting appropriate professionalism. She reviewed her talking points one final time, confident that her MBA credentials and social connections had secured her path upward through the company hierarchy. Susan arrived 30 minutes early as always, using the quiet time to organize her workspace and review the priority projects that would demand her attention. Her simple black blazer and white blouse spoke to competence without flash, the uniform of someone who believed work should speak louder than appearance. She had no knowledge of the meeting scheduled for 10 o'clock that would reshape her understanding of her place within the organization. Kong Min entered the conference room with the deliberate pace of someone accustomed to command, his presence shifting the energy of the space in ways that made even senior executives straighten in their chairs. The human resources director shuffled her papers nervously, while the department heads exchanged glances that suggested they were as curious about this announcement as anyone else in the building. The promotion list was brief, containing only one name that would matter for the future of the company. Kong Min spoke with characteristic directness, his words carrying the weight of absolute authority. The position of personal assistant required someone with exceptional attention to detail, unwavering discretion, and the ability to anticipate needs before they were expressed. These qualities, he continued, were rare and valuable beyond any credentials or connections. Roxana felt her confidence solidify as the description matched perfectly with her self-perception, her smile beginning to form as she prepared to accept the role graciously. The other candidates shifted in their seats, some already resigned to disappointment, while others clung to hope despite the obvious frontrunner. Susan Martinez, Kong Min announced, would assume the position effective immediately. The silence that followed felt dense enough to cut, punctuated only by the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Roxana's carefully composed expression flickered for just an instant, revealing something sharp and dangerous before professional courtesy reasserted itself. The department heads exchanged surprised glances, while the human resources director made notes with slightly trembling hands. Susan herself remained frozen in her chair, certain she had misheard despite the clarity of Kong Min's pronunciation. The name had been spoken with the same measured authority he used for all important announcements, yet the impossibility of it made her question her own perception of reality. Kong Min continued speaking, outlining the responsibilities and expectations that came with the role, but his eyes found Susan across the table with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. There was something in his gaze that suggested this decision had been reached through observation rather than impulse, through months of careful attention to details that others had dismissed as insignificant. The meeting concluded with handshakes and congratulations that felt strangely hollow, as if everyone present understood they were participating in a script whose ending had surprised even the writers. Roxana excused herself with impeccable politeness, though her jaw remained tight with suppressed emotion. The other candidates offered Susan their best wishes with varying degrees of sincerity, while the executives filed out discussing the unexpected development in hushed tones. Susan found herself alone in the conference room with Kong Min, the magnitude of what had just occurred settling over her like a weight she was not certain she could carry. He approached her with the same measured pace he had used to enter, his expression unreadable yet somehow reassuring. He told her that competence spoke louder than credentials, that integrity outweighed connections, and that he had been watching her handle impossible situations with grace that impressed him more than any degree or recommendation ever could. The late-night client call had been only the most recent example of qualities he had observed consistently over the months since her hiring. Susan's voice barely rose above a whisper as she asked if he was certain about his choice, if perhaps there had been some mistake in the selection process. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, betraying the confidence she worked so hard to project in her daily interactions. Kong Min's response carried the weight of absolute certainty. He had built his success on the ability to recognize value wherever it appeared, regardless of packaging or presentation. Susan Martinez possessed exactly the qualities he needed in someone who would have access to his most sensitive business matters. The decision was final, and it was correct. As they left the conference room together, Susan felt the weight of hundreds of eyes following their movement through the office floor. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as colleagues processed the implications of what they were witnessing. The quiet secretary who stayed late and arrived early had somehow leapfrogged over candidates with advanced degrees and influential connections. Roxana watched from her desk as Susan disappeared into the elevator with Kong Min, her fingers gripping her coffee mug with enough force to turn her knuckles white. The promotion she had considered inevitable had been handed to someone she had barely noticed, someone whose qualifications seemed laughably inadequate compared to her own credentials and social positioning. The afternoon passed in a blur of orientation meetings and system access tutorials, with Susan struggling to absorb information that felt too advanced for her previous responsibilities. Kong Min remained patient throughout each explanation, occasionally offering clarification or context that demonstrated his own deep understanding of every aspect of the business operations. As the office emptied around them and evening settled over San Antonio, Susan realized she was experiencing the first day of a completely transformed existence. The recognition she had stopped expecting had arrived with an intensity that left her questioning whether she deserved the faith Kong Min had placed in her abilities. Kong Min walked her to the elevator at the end of that first day, his presence both intimidating and oddly comforting as they stood together in the empty hallway. He told her that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but that he had complete confidence in her ability to exceed every expectation. The investment he was making in her potential, he suggested, would prove beneficial for both of them in ways she could not yet imagine. The elevator doors closed between them, leaving Susan alone with her reflection in the polished steel and the profound realization that her carefully ordered world had just been completely rewritten by a man whose motivations remained as mysterious as his unwavering confidence in her untested capabilities. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the executive level as Susan stepped out of the elevator, her leather portfolio clutched against her chest like armor. 3 days had passed since the promotion announcement, and each sunrise brought fresh challenges that tested every skill she had developed during her years in the corporate trenches. Kong Min's schedule alone required the coordination abilities of a military strategist, with back-to-back meetings, international conference calls, and strategic planning sessions that could reshape entire industries. Susan had arrived an hour early to review the quarterly projections that would dominate today's board presentation, her eyes scanning columns of numbers that represented millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs. The responsibility felt enormous, yet Kong Min's quiet confidence in her abilities had begun to settle into her bones like warmth after a long winter. He explained each aspect of his business operations with patience that surprised her, treating her questions as opportunities for clarification rather than evidence of inadequacy. Roxana emerged from the break room with coffee steaming from her designer travel mug, her smile bright enough to power the building's lighting system. She approached Susan's new desk with the measured steps of someone who had spent considerable time planning this conversation, her voice carrying just enough sweetness to mask the venom underneath. She congratulated Susan on the promotion with words that sounded genuine to anyone who might be listening, but her eyes held a coldness that made Susan's skin prickle with unease. Roxana mentioned how wonderful it was to see the company embracing diversity initiatives, how important it was to provide opportunities for people who might not otherwise have access to such positions. The compliment felt like a backhanded slap, delivered with surgical precision to inflict maximum damage while maintaining plausible deniability. Susan forced herself to respond graciously, thanking Roxana for her kind words while internally cataloging the subtle insult for future reference. She had encountered this type of workplace aggression before, the careful undermining disguised as support that left victims questioning their own perceptions of reality. The key was documentation and professionalism, refusing to let emotional reactions provide ammunition for further attacks. Kong Min arrived precisely at 8:30, his presence immediately commanding attention from everyone within visual range. His charcoal suit had been tailored with mathematical precision, each line emphasizing the controlled power that radiated from his every movement. Susan rose from her desk to greet him with the morning briefing materials, their fingers brushing briefly as she handed over the portfolio that contained his day's priorities. The contact lasted only seconds, yet Susan felt electricity travel up her arm and settle somewhere near her heart. Kong Min's dark eyes met hers with an intensity that suggested he had experienced the same unexpected jolt, though his expression remained professionally neutral. He thanked her for the thorough preparation, his voice carrying warmth that seemed reserved specifically for their interactions. Roxana observed this exchange from her position near the copy machine, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly as she witnessed the easy familiarity developing between Susan and Kong Min. The partnership that was forming threatened everything she had assumed about her own place in the office hierarchy, challenging her fundamental beliefs about who deserved recognition and advancement. The first act of sabotage came disguised as helpful efficiency. Susan discovered that 3 critical files had mysteriously vanished from Kong Min's desk between the time she had organized them the previous evening and when he arrived for his morning meetings. The documents contained sensitive information about a potential merger that could not be easily recreated, their absence threatening to derail negotiations that had been months in the making. Susan spent her lunch break retracing every step of her organizational process, checking with security about after-hours building access, and questioning the cleaning staff about any unusual activity. The files eventually surfaced in the recycling bin behind Roxana's desk, though establishing how they had arrived there proved impossible without security footage that conveniently malfunctioned during the relevant time period. Kong Min's reaction to the missing documents revealed protective instincts that surprised Susan with their intensity. Rather than expressing frustration with her organizational skills, he immediately suspected deliberate interference and launched his own investigation into the incident. His questions were pointed and systematic, suggesting experience with corporate espionage that went far beyond typical business concerns. The second week brought escalating incidents that followed a pattern of plausible deniability combined with maximum disruption. Meeting times were mysteriously changed in Susan's calendar system, leaving her scrambling to notify participants of schedule modifications that she had never authorized. Important phone messages disappeared from her desk, forcing her to reconstruct conversations from memory and creating the appearance of unreliability. Susan began staying later each evening to double-check every system and procedure, her perfectionist tendencies amplified by the knowledge that invisible enemies were actively working to undermine her credibility. The stress manifested in tension headaches and disrupted sleep, though she refused to let the psychological warfare affect the quality of her work performance. Kong Min noticed her exhaustion during their afternoon strategy session, his perceptive gaze cataloging the dark circles under her eyes and the way she rubbed her temples when she thought he was not looking. His concern manifested in subtle gestures that spoke louder than words, ensuring her favorite coffee appeared on her desk each morning and adjusting meeting schedules to provide breaks when her energy flagged. Roxana had begun recruiting allies among the staff members who resented Susan's rapid elevation, carefully planting seeds of doubt about diversity hiring practices and unqualified candidates receiving preferential treatment. Her comments were always delivered with apparent reluctance, as if she was sharing uncomfortable truths rather than spreading malicious gossip designed to poison the workplace atmosphere. The campaign reached Susan's ears through sympathetic colleagues who warned her about the whispered conversations taking place in break rooms and bathroom corners. The accusations stung because they attacked not just her competence, but her right to occupy space that others believed belonged to them by virtue of education or social connections. Susan found herself second-guessing every decision and triple-checking every task, the constant scrutiny, creating a hypervigilance that drained her emotional reserves. She had worked too hard to achieve this position to let it slip away through careless mistakes or political maneuvering. Yet the pressure felt like trying to build sandcastles while the tide was actively washing them away. Kong Min's defense of her capabilities came during a senior staff meeting where department heads questioned the wisdom of promoting someone without advanced degrees or extensive management experience. His response was delivered with the calm authority of someone accustomed to having his judgment respected without explanation, yet the passion underlying his words suggested personal investment that went beyond professional considerations. He outlined Susan's accomplishments with specificity that demonstrated careful attention to her work performance, citing examples of problem-solving and client management that had impressed him more than any credentials possibly could. The room fell silent as he spoke, senior executives processing the implications of such strong support from someone whose business acumen had generated millions in company profits. Susan learned about this defense through whispered conversations and meaningful glances from colleagues who had witnessed Kong Min's unexpected advocacy. The knowledge that he had risked political capital to support her sent warmth flooding through her chest, followed immediately by anxiety about living up to such public confidence in her abilities. The third week brought technological sabotage that required more sophisticated knowledge than missing files or changed appointments. Susan's computer system began experiencing mysterious glitches that corrupted important documents and crashed during critical deadlines, forcing her to maintain backup systems and work around failures that seemed to occur at the worst possible moments. Kong Min's investigation into these incidents revealed security vulnerabilities that suggested insider knowledge of company computer systems, leading him to implement monitoring protocols that went far beyond standard corporate security measures. His response demonstrated resources and expertise that raised questions about the true nature of his business operations, though Susan was too focused on survival to analyze the implications. Roxana's psychological campaign intensified as her more subtle efforts failed to produce the desired results. Her comments became sharper and more direct, questioning Susan's qualifications in front of clients and suggesting that Kong Min's judgment had been compromised by factors unrelated to professional competence. The attacks were carefully calculated to inflict maximum damage while remaining just subtle enough to avoid formal complaints. Susan began documenting every incident with the methodical precision of someone building a legal case, though she hesitated to escalate the situation through official channels. The accusations about diversity hiring and unqualified promotions created a trap where defending herself might seem to validate the underlying assumptions about her capabilities. Kong Min's protective instincts became more apparent as he witnessed the toll that Roxana's campaign was taking on Susan's confidence and well-being. His interactions with her grew more frequent and personal, their professional relationship developing layers of intimacy that transcended typical employer-employee boundaries. He began walking her to the elevator each evening, their conversations extending beyond work topics to include personal interests and background details that revealed unexpected commonalities. The month concluded with Susan having successfully navigated every challenge thrown in her path, her competence proven through performance rather than credentials. Kong Min's satisfaction with her work was evident in the increasing responsibilities he entrusted to her care and the way his entire demeanor softened during their private meetings. Yet Roxana's campaign showed no signs of slowing, her frustrated rage building toward expressions that would soon transcend workplace politics and venture into genuinely dangerous territory. The foundation had been laid for a conflict that would test every relationship and reveal the true character of everyone involved, while Susan and Kong Min's growing connection threatened to complicate an already volatile situation in ways that neither of them could fully anticipate. The fourth week arrived with autumn settling over San Antonio like a heavy blanket, the corporate offices taking on a different energy as quarterly deadlines approached and executive tensions reached their seasonal peak. Susan had developed routines designed to counteract the ongoing sabotage campaign, arriving even earlier to check her systems and staying later to secure sensitive documents that seemed to disappear whenever her vigilance relaxed. Kong Min's morning briefings had evolved into strategy sessions that revealed the sophisticated nature of his business operations, with discussions touching on international markets, complex financial instruments, and risk management protocols that suggested experience with ventures far beyond standard corporate activities. Susan absorbed this information with growing fascination, her questions becoming more insightful as she began to understand the intricate web of relationships that sustained his empire. The discovery came on a Thursday morning when Susan found a USB drive tucked behind her computer monitor, its presence so obviously planted that she knew immediately this represented an escalation beyond mere workplace harassment. The device contained what appeared to be confidential client information and strategic planning documents that would be worth millions to competing firms, along with email chains suggesting she had been providing this intelligence to external contacts for substantial payments. Susan stared at the fabricated evidence with a mixture of admiration and horror, recognizing the sophistication required to create such convincing documentation. The fake email chains used her actual writing style and included references to legitimate client meetings, suggesting someone with deep access to her communications and detailed knowledge of her daily responsibilities. The financial records showed payments to offshore accounts that had been established in her name, complete with digital signatures that would be difficult to disprove without expert analysis. Roxana's timing proved impeccable as she arrived at Susan's desk within minutes of the discovery, her expression carefully calibrated to convey concerned surprise rather than malicious satisfaction. She asked if everything was all right, noting that Susan appeared distressed about something she had found on her computer. The performance was flawless, designed to establish herself as a potential witness to Susan's suspicious behavior rather than the architect of an elaborate frame-up. Susan's response was measured despite the rage building in her chest, her voice steady as she explained that someone had planted false evidence suggesting corporate espionage activities. She made no accusations despite knowing exactly who was responsible, instead focusing on the technical aspects of the fabrication that revealed insider knowledge of company systems and security protocols. Kong Min's reaction to this development transformed him from concerned employer into something far more dangerous and calculating. His questions were precise and systematic, demonstrating investigative skills that went well beyond typical business training. He examined the planted evidence with the thoroughness of someone experienced in forensic analysis, immediately identifying inconsistencies that would prove Susan's innocence to anyone willing to look carefully. The investigation Kong Min launched into the corporate leak revealed resources and connections that began to illuminate the true nature of his operations. Phone calls were made to contacts who specialized in corporate security and digital forensics, their responses suggesting relationships built through activities that operated in legal gray areas. Susan witnessed these conversations with growing awareness that her protector possessed capabilities that extended far beyond legitimate business concerns. Roxana's schedule manipulation reached new levels of sophistication as she gained access to administrative systems that allowed her to create vulnerabilities without leaving obvious fingerprints. Susan found herself assigned to late-night security checks in isolated areas of the building, asked to attend off-site meetings in locations that would leave her exposed and alone, and given responsibilities that required her to carry sensitive information through areas with limited surveillance coverage. The emotional toll of constant vigilance began affecting Susan's performance despite her determination to maintain professional standards. Sleep became elusive as she mentally rehearsed responses to accusations that had not yet materialized, while her appetite disappeared under the stress of knowing that enemies were actively working to destroy her reputation and career. The isolation was perhaps the worst aspect, as colleagues who might normally offer support were poisoned against her by carefully planted rumors about her integrity and loyalty. Kong Min noticed the deterioration in her condition during their evening strategy session, his protective instincts overwhelming professional boundaries as he questioned her about the specific threats she was facing. The conversation that followed marked a turning point in their relationship, transforming from employer concern into something much more personal and intimate. Susan found herself confessing fears and vulnerabilities she had never shared with anyone, her carefully maintained professional facade cracking under the weight of sustained psychological warfare. She spoke about feeling isolated and targeted, about questioning her own perceptions when gaslighting reached levels that made her doubt her memory of events. Kong Min listened with intensity that made her feel truly heard for the first time in weeks, his responses demonstrating understanding that went beyond sympathy into genuine partnership. The confession led to physical comfort that began innocently, but evolved into something charged with romantic tension, their proximity creating electricity that neither could ignore despite the professional complications. Kong Min's hand on her shoulder became fingers gently stroking her hair, while Susan's grateful gratitude transformed into awareness of his masculine presence and the safety his protection represented. They pulled apart before crossing lines that could not be uncrossed, yet both understood that their relationship had fundamentally shifted. Kong Min's investigation into the corporate espionage used methods and resources that definitively established his connections to activities outside legal boundaries. Surveillance footage appeared from sources that should not have had access to corporate security systems, while digital analysis revealed manipulation techniques that required expertise available only through specialized criminal networks. His contacts provided information about Roxana's activities that could only have been obtained through methods that legitimate investigators could never employ. Susan processed these revelations with surprising calm, her practical nature accepting that protection sometimes required moral flexibility. Kong Min's willingness to use questionable means to defend her innocence demonstrated commitment that transcended typical professional relationships, while his criminal connections began to seem less threatening than reassuring given the sophisticated nature of the attack she faced. Roxana's preparation for the final frame-up involved recruiting accomplices whose credentials would lend credibility to her accusations, including a disgruntled former employee with cybersecurity expertise and a competing firm eager to discredit Kong Min's organization through scandal. The conspiracy required precise timing and coordination, with evidence planted across multiple systems simultaneously to create the appearance of ongoing betrayal rather than isolated incidents. The financial component of the frame-up proved particularly sophisticated, involving cryptocurrency transactions and offshore banking records that would require federal investigation to disprove completely. Roxana had clearly invested significant time and resources in creating a narrative that would survive initial scrutiny while destroying Susan's credibility permanently, regardless of eventual vindication through detailed analysis. Susan's growing awareness of these machinations came through Kong Min's intelligence network, which had begun monitoring Roxana's communications and financial activities with resources that demonstrated the reach of his criminal connections. The information revealed a conspiracy that extended beyond personal jealousy into territory that could result in federal prosecution for corporate espionage, making the stakes far higher than simple workplace harassment. Kong Min's response to these discoveries involved mobilizing protective measures that revealed the military precision with which he operated his various enterprises. Security protocols were implemented that transformed the corporate office into something resembling a fortress, with surveillance systems, access controls, and personnel screening that exceeded what any legitimate business would require for protection against corporate espionage. The week concluded with Susan understanding that she had become the focal point of a conflict that transcended workplace politics and ventured into genuinely dangerous territory. Roxana's plans had reached a sophistication that threatened federal prosecution and criminal consequences, while Kong Min's protection involved resources and methods that operated outside legal boundaries. The next phase would require choices that could not be reversed and alliances that would define the rest of her life. Susan's isolation had been carefully orchestrated to create maximum vulnerability for whatever final assault Roxana was planning, while her growing emotional dependence on Kong Min's protection had created bonds that transcended professional relationships and entered territory where love and danger intertwined in ways that could either save or destroy them both. The foundation had been laid for a climactic confrontation that would test every loyalty and reveal the true cost of the choices that had brought them to this moment. The Friday morning that would reshape Susan's understanding of betrayal and vulnerability began with deceptive normalcy, autumn sunlight streaming through the corporate office windows as she organized Kong Min's schedule with the meticulous attention to detail that had become her trademark. The fabricated evidence that Roxana had planted throughout the company's digital systems was already working its poison through channels that Susan could not yet perceive, while conversations were taking place in executive boardrooms that would soon explode her carefully constructed professional life. Kong Min had been called away to an emergency meeting across town, his departure orchestrated through Roxana's manipulation of his calendar system to create a window of vulnerability that she had been planning for weeks. The meeting involved a fabricated crisis at one of his subsidiary companies, complete with falsified financial reports and manufactured legal complications that required his immediate personal attention. His protective presence was being systematically removed just as the trap was set to spring. Susan spent the morning reviewing quarterly projections and preparing presentation materials for the upcoming board meeting, unaware that her access to sensitive financial data was being used as evidence of corporate espionage activities. The legitimate work she performed daily had been twisted into a narrative of betrayal and theft, with every professional competency transformed into proof of criminal intent through careful manipulation of context and timing. The first indication that something had gone catastrophically wrong came when Human Resources Director Patricia Chen appeared at Susan's desk with an expression that mixed professional composure with barely concealed anxiety. She requested that Susan join her in conference room B immediately for a meeting that could not wait for Kong Min's return. The tone carried ominous weight that made Susan's stomach clench with premonitory dread. The conference room contained more executive firepower than Susan had ever seen assembled in one place, with department heads, legal counsel, and senior management arranged around the polished table like judges preparing to render verdict on a capital case. The atmosphere felt heavy with predetermined conclusions, the kind of meeting where guilt had already been established and proceedings were mere formality before punishment. Chief Financial Officer Marcus Thompson opened the proceedings with clinical precision, outlining a pattern of corporate espionage that had been discovered through routine security audits and financial analysis. The accusations were devastating in their specificity, with timestamps, financial transfers, and communication records that painted Susan as the architect of a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to benefit competing organizations. Susan listened with growing horror as her legitimate work activities were recontextualized as evidence of criminal betrayal. Every client meeting transformed into an opportunity for information gathering. Every late night at the office reframed as time spent copying sensitive documents for external sale. The fabricated email chains were presented as authentic communications with competitive intelligence brokers, while the offshore financial accounts bore her forged signatures and contained payment records for information that could only have come from someone with her level of access. The evidence was overwhelming in its complexity and devastating in its implications, clearly the work of someone with sophisticated understanding of both corporate security systems and legal evidence standards. Susan recognized Roxana's fingerprints on every aspect of the frame-up, yet proving that recognition would require resources and expertise far beyond what an accused employee could marshal in her own defense. Legal counsel Jennifer Walsh explained the company's position with the measured tone of someone accustomed to delivering career-ending news, outlining the potential criminal charges that could result from corporate espionage activities and the civil liability that could bankrupt Susan for the rest of her life. The presentation was designed to encourage confession and cooperation rather than resistance, with immunity offered in exchange for full disclosure of methods and contacts. Susan's response was delivered with dignity that surprised even herself, her voice steady as she categorically denied every accusation and challenged the authenticity of evidence that she knew had been fabricated. She pointed out inconsistencies in the timeline and questioned the convenient timing of the discovery, though her protests sounded weak against the weight of seemingly overwhelming proof. The decision to suspend her pending further investigation was delivered with corporate efficiency that masked the personal satisfaction visible in Patricia Chen's eyes. Susan's access credentials were immediately revoked. Her personal belongings were to be searched before removal from the building, and she was forbidden from contacting any clients or colleagues while the matter remained under investigation. The walk from the conference room to her desk felt like a perp walk, with colleagues averting their eyes and conversations stopping as news of the accusations spread through office gossip networks with viral intensity. Susan gathered her personal items under security supervision while dozens of eyes tracked her movements, transforming her from respected professional into corporate pariah within the span of 30 minutes. Roxana's performance during this public humiliation was masterful in its restraint, her expression conveying shocked disappointment rather than triumphant satisfaction as she watched her careful plans reach fruition. She approached Susan during the packing process to offer support and express disbelief at the accusations, her concern appearing genuine to observers while her eyes held glints of satisfaction that only Susan could detect. The parking garage became Susan's refuge from the scrutiny and whispered conversations that followed her through the building, its concrete walls providing temporary sanctuary from the professional assassination she had just witnessed. She sat in her car with hands trembling on the steering wheel, processing the magnitude of destruction that had been visited upon her career and reputation through calculated malice that she had been powerless to prevent. Kong Min's absence during this crucial moment had been timed with precision that revealed Roxana's deep understanding of his protective instincts and daily routines. The emergency that had drawn him across town would keep him occupied for hours while the frame-up reached its conclusion, and Susan found herself isolated exactly when she needed his support most desperately. The men who had been watching Kong Min's organization for weeks recognized this moment as the perfect opportunity to strike at his most vulnerable point, having identified Susan as someone whose safety mattered to him more than profit margins or territorial disputes. Their surveillance had revealed the growing emotional connection between the crime boss and his assistant, creating leverage that could be exploited for ransom, information, or simple revenge against a competitor. Susan's emotional devastation made her an easy target as she sat alone in the parking garage, her attention focused inward on processing betrayal rather than scanning her environment for external threats. The tears that had finally begun flowing blurred her vision and muffled her hearing, creating perfect conditions for an approach that she would not detect until escape became impossible. The kidnapping unfolded with military precision that spoke to professional training and careful planning, with multiple vehicles coordinating to box in her car, while armed men approached from angles that prevented resistance or flight. Susan's shocked recognition of her danger came too late for effective response, her corporate security training proving inadequate against operatives who specialized in exactly this type of extraction. The violence was swift and efficient rather than gratuitously brutal, with her captors demonstrating professional restraint that suggested profit motive rather than sadistic pleasure. Susan found herself transferred to a van with tinted windows while her car remained in the parking spot, creating the appearance that she had simply left the building voluntarily after her suspension. Kong Min's return to the office occurred precisely as Roxana had calculated, his arrival time to discover both Susan's suspension and her apparent disappearance simultaneously. The emergency that had drawn him away proved to be fabricated upon investigation, its various crises dissolving into misunderstandings and administrative errors that should never have required his personal attention. The security footage that Kong Min immediately demanded revealed Susan's emotional departure from the building, but captured nothing of the kidnapping itself, the parking garage cameras having experienced mysterious technical difficulties during the crucial time period. His growing suspicion about the timing of these events was accompanied by rage that made even his most experienced lieutenant step carefully around his volcanic mood. The discovery of the corporate espionage accusations against Susan struck Kong Min as impossible given his intimate knowledge of her character and capabilities, yet the evidence appeared overwhelming to anyone without his insight into her true nature. The combination of her suspension, disappearance, and apparent betrayal created a perfect storm of confusion and misdirection that would require all his resources and criminal expertise to unravel. Kong Min's transformation from concerned employer into avenging crime lord began with phone calls to contacts who specialized in information gathering and human recovery, his network of criminal professionals mobilizing with efficiency that demonstrated the respect his reputation commanded. The search for Susan would reveal capabilities that went far beyond legitimate business operations, exposing the true nature of his empire to anyone who chose to look carefully. The evening sun cast long shadows through the empty office as Kong Min stood at Susan's desk, surrounded by evidence of her professional competence and personal integrity that contradicted every accusation leveled against her. The carefully organized workspace spoke to dedication and attention to detail that made corporate espionage accusations seem laughable, yet her absence created a void that threatened to consume his carefully controlled world. Roxana's satisfaction at the day's events was tempered by awareness that Kong Min's investigation capabilities extended far beyond normal corporate security measures, his criminal connections providing resources that could expose her careful frame-up if given sufficient time and motivation. The kidnapping that she had not planned but had inadvertently facilitated threatened to escalate the situation beyond her control, transforming workplace harassment into something far more dangerous and unpredictable. The warehouse where Susan regained consciousness smelled of rust and abandonment, with autumn light filtering through grimy windows to illuminate concrete floors stained by decades of industrial use. Her head throbbed from whatever chemical they had used to subdue her during transport, while plastic restraints cut into her wrists with enough pressure to maintain control without causing permanent damage. The professionalism of her captors was evident in every detail, from the soundproofing that muffled external noise to the strategic placement of surveillance cameras that monitored her from multiple angles. Kong Min stood in his empty office like a predator whose territory had been violated, his controlled fury radiating through the corporate space with intensity that made hardened executives step carefully around his volcanic mood. The fabricated evidence against Susan lay scattered across his desk, each document representing another layer of deception that someone had invested considerable time and resources to construct. His trained eye identified inconsistencies that proved the frame-up beyond doubt. Yet proving Susan's innocence meant nothing if she remained in the hands of enemies who would use her as leverage against him. The phone call that initiated his response was made to Viktor Kozlov, a former Spetsnaz operative whose security consulting firm provided services that existed in the gray areas between legal investigation and criminal enforcement. Kong Min's request was delivered with the measured authority of someone accustomed to having dangerous orders followed without question, his words carrying implications that would mobilize resources across 3 states within hours. Susan tested her restraints with careful precision while cataloging every detail of her prison environment, her analytical mind working to identify potential escape routes and defensive positions despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm rational thought. The warehouse appeared to be abandoned industrial space, converted for temporary operations, with minimal furnishing but sophisticated security measures that suggested her captors possessed both financial resources and operational expertise. The men guarding her maintained professional demeanor that revealed military or law enforcement training, their interactions efficient and impersonal rather than sadistic or threatening. Their conversations, conducted in accented English that suggested Eastern European origins, focused on logistics and timing rather than personal violence, offering some comfort that her value alive exceeded any satisfaction they might derive from causing unnecessary harm. Kong Min's second call reached Jean Watanabe, whose import-export business provided cover for information brokerage services that connected criminal organizations across international boundaries. The request for immediate intelligence on recently active kidnapping cells operating in the San Antonio area would tap networks that legitimate law enforcement could never access, generating leads within hours rather than the days or weeks that official investigations typically required. The investigation into Susan's corporate espionage accusations proceeded simultaneously with the rescue operation, Kong Min's analytical mind recognizing that the timing of her suspension and kidnapping could not be coincidental. His examination of the security logs revealed Roxana's digital fingerprints on the schedule manipulation that had drawn him away during the crucial period, establishing her culpability in creating the vulnerability that enabled the kidnapping. Susan's captors began interrogation procedures designed to extract information about Kong Min's business operations and criminal connections, their questions revealing sophisticated understanding of his organizational structure and financial networks. She responded with selective honesty that protected critical details while providing enough cooperation to delay escalation toward more aggressive persuasion methods, her intelligence serving as protection against immediate violence. The breakthrough in Kong Min's investigation came through traffic surveillance analysis conducted by contacts whose access to municipal security systems operated outside legal authorization channels. Victor's team identified the van used in Susan's kidnapping and traced its movements to an industrial district where several warehouses provided ideal locations for temporary detention operations. Kong Min's mobilization of rescue resources revealed the true scope of his criminal empire, with calls reaching lieutenants who commanded cells specializing in urban warfare, surveillance, and hostage extraction. The coordination involved dozens of professional criminals whose loyalty had been earned through years of profitable operations and mutual protection, their combined expertise representing military-level capabilities that could overwhelm most civilian targets. Susan's psychological preparation for whatever violence might be required included mental rehearsal of survival strategies and escape scenarios, her determination to survive strengthened by growing awareness of Kong Min's likely response to her kidnapping. The connection that had developed between them transcended professional relationships, creating emotional bonds that would motivate extreme measures for her protection and recovery. The warehouse assault began with systematic elimination of external security measures, Kong Min's team neutralizing surveillance systems and perimeter guards with efficiency that spoke to extensive tactical training. The operation unfolded with military precision designed to minimize casualties while maximizing speed, overwhelming Susan's captors before they could implement contingency plans that might threaten her safety. Kong Min personally led the rescue team through the warehouse interior, his usual corporate composure replaced by something primal and deadly that transformed him from business executive into apex predator. The controlled violence he displayed while clearing rooms and neutralizing threats revealed capabilities that went far beyond legitimate business training, his movements flowing with lethal grace that spoke to extensive combat experience. Susan heard the gunfire approaching her location with mixture of hope and terror, recognizing that rescue attempts carried their own dangers even when conducted by people motivated to preserve her safety. Her captor's response was professional retreat rather than desperate last stands, their operational planning having included extraction protocols for exactly this type of overwhelming assault. The moment Kong Min breached her detention area marked a transformation in their relationship that transcended all previous boundaries. His relief at finding her alive combining with rage at those who had dared to threaten someone under his protection. Susan saw him clearly for perhaps the first time, recognizing the deadly competence that had built his empire alongside the genuine tenderness that he reserved specifically for her. The aftermath of the rescue operation included systematic interrogation of surviving captors to identify the organization responsible for the kidnapping attempt, Kong Min's methods of information extraction existing well outside legal boundaries, yet producing intelligence that law enforcement could never obtain. The revelation that Susan had been targeted specifically because of her importance to him added personal motivation to his pursuit of justice against those who had orchestrated her capture. Roxana's arrest occurred simultaneously with Susan's rescue as Kong Min's investigation team presented evidence of her sabotage activities to both corporate security and federal authorities. The documentation of her digital manipulation, combined with testimony from rescued captives about the intelligence that had enabled their operation, established legal grounds for charges ranging from corporate espionage to conspiracy and kidnapping. Susan's reunion with Kong Min in the warehouse aftermath eliminated any remaining pretense about the nature of their relationship, their embrace conveying emotions that neither had been willing to acknowledge during the careful dance of their professional interactions. The protection he had mobilized on her behalf demonstrated commitment that transcended business partnerships, while her survival had required courage that proved her worthiness of such extraordinary devotion. The drive back to the city provided opportunity for honest conversation about the criminal realities that Kong Min had concealed behind corporate facades, his confession delivered with vulnerability that contrasted sharply with the lethal competence he had displayed during her rescue. Susan's acceptance of these revelations was informed by practical recognition that his dangerous capabilities had just saved her life, making moral judgments seem less important than genuine connection. The hospital examination that followed confirmed Susan's physical well-being while providing private space for processing the psychological impact of kidnapping and rescue, her trauma complicated by awareness that the violence visited upon her captors had been motivated by Kong Min's feelings rather than simple business concerns. The intensity of his protective response revealed depths of emotion that transformed her understanding of their relationship possibilities. Kong Min's vigil during Susan's medical evaluation demonstrated priorities that had shifted definitively away from business concerns toward personal devotion, his empire temporarily forgotten, while he focused entirely on her recovery and safety. The transformation from corporate executive into devoted protector felt complete and irreversible, establishing new foundations for whatever relationship they might build together. The evening concluded with Susan's full vindication as corporate investigators confirmed the fabrication of espionage evidence, while federal agents processed Roxana's arrest for conspiracy charges that would ensure her removal from their lives permanently. The combination of personal victory and professional justice created cathartic satisfaction that began healing the trauma of recent days while opening possibilities for a future built on honesty about Kong Min's true nature. Susan's choice to remain with Kong Min despite full knowledge of his criminal activities marked her acceptance of a life that would exist outside conventional moral boundaries, her decision informed by recognition that his protection had saved her life, while his devotion offered emotional security that transcended concerns about legal compliance. The foundation had been established for a partnership that would merge love with danger in ways that would define the rest of their shared existence. The Monday morning that followed Susan's rescue dawned with San Antonio sunshine that seemed brighter than any she could remember, autumn lights streaming through the hospital room windows, where she had spent the weekend recovering from her ordeal. Kong Min had maintained constant vigil beside her bed, his corporate empire temporarily forgotten, while he focused entirely on her physical healing and emotional recovery. The transformation from business executive into devoted protector felt complete and irreversible, establishing new foundations for whatever relationship they might build together. The corporate investigation that had begun during her kidnapping reached its explosive conclusion with revelations that vindicated Susan completely while exposing the sophisticated nature of Roxana's sabotage campaign. Digital forensic experts brought in by Kong Min's security team had unraveled months of systematic manipulation, revealing evidence trails that connected every mysterious incident to Roxana's deliberate interference with company systems and Susan's professional responsibilities. Chief Financial Officer Marcus Thompson delivered the findings to an emergency board meeting with clinical precision that barely concealed his embarrassment at having been deceived so thoroughly. The fabricated evidence that had seemed so convincing during Susan's suspension crumbled under expert analysis, revealing digital fingerprints and metadata inconsistencies that proved extensive manipulation of corporate records and communication systems. Susan's return to the office building felt like a triumphant homecoming as news of her vindication spread through corporate gossip networks with viral intensity. Colleagues who had avoided her during the espionage accusations now approached with apologies and congratulations, their relief at discovering her innocence mixed with admiration for the grace she had maintained throughout her ordeal. The walk from the elevator to her desk became a celebration of competence vindicated and integrity proven under impossible pressure. Kong Min's honest conversation about his criminal connections took place in the privacy of his office that evening, their first opportunity for complete honesty since the rescue operation had revealed capabilities that existed well outside legitimate business boundaries. He spoke with vulnerability that contrasted sharply with the lethal competence he had displayed during her extraction, confessing details about his empire that transformed her understanding of the man who had risked everything for her protection. The revelation that his legitimate businesses provided cover for operations that included money laundering, protection services, and intelligence brokerage was delivered with matter-of-fact directness that invited questions rather than demanding acceptance. Kong Min explained the historical circumstances that had led him into criminal activities while emphasizing that recent years had involved transition toward more legitimate enterprises, though complete separation from illegal operations remained years in the future. Susan processed these confessions with surprising calm that spoke to fundamental changes in her priorities since the kidnapping, her brush with genuine danger having clarified what truly mattered in ways that corporate success never could. The man who had mobilized criminal networks to save her life deserved honesty about her own willingness to accept moral complexity in exchange for emotional security and authentic connection. Her response was delivered with certainty that surprised them both, her voice steady as she acknowledged understanding of the risks while confirming her choice to remain with him despite complete knowledge of his criminal activities. The decision was informed by practical recognition that his dangerous capabilities had saved her life, while his devotion offered protection and love that transcended concerns about legal compliance. The federal investigation into Roxana's activities reached its conclusion with charges that ensured her permanent removal from their lives, the evidence gathered during Susan's rescue operation providing prosecutors with overwhelming proof of conspiracy in kidnapping along with multiple counts of corporate espionage and computer fraud. The arrest had been conducted with efficiency that reflected the quality of intelligence Kong Min's team had provided to federal authorities through carefully laundered channels. Roxana's trial became a cautionary tale about workplace jealousy escalating into criminal behavior, with testimony revealing the sophisticated planning required to orchestrate both the corporate frame-up and the security vulnerabilities that had enabled Susan's kidnapping. The sentence of 15 years in federal prison reflected judicial recognition that her actions had transcended simple sabotage into territory that threatened human life through calculated malice. Susan's transformation into Kong Min's acknowledged partner involved learning to navigate the complexity of his world while maintaining her own moral compass. Their relationship evolving into something that merged genuine love with practical acceptance of criminal realities. The protection he offered came with responsibilities that included discretion about his operations and understanding that their future together would exist outside conventional social boundaries. The corporate restructuring that followed these events included Susan's promotion to Chief Operations Officer, a position that recognized both her vindicated competence and her unique relationship with Kong Min. The role provided legitimate explanation for their close working relationship, while giving her authority over business operations that were transitioning toward complete legal compliance under her influence. Kong Min's gradual withdrawal from illegal activities accelerated under Susan's influence, her presence providing motivation for transformation that he had been contemplating for years without sufficient emotional investment to make the difficult transition. The process would require careful negotiation with criminal partners and systematic replacement of illegal revenue streams. Yet her love made sacrifices seem worthwhile rather than merely prudent. The penthouse apartment that became their shared residence represented a new chapter in both their lives. Its sophisticated security measures protecting against enemies Kong Min had accumulated during his criminal career while providing sanctuary where their relationship could develop without external pressures. The space became their private world where business executive and reformed criminal could simply be two people who had chosen each other despite impossible circumstances. The evening routine they established involved debriefing sessions where Kong Min shared details about his transition toward legitimacy, while Susan provided perspective that helped him navigate moral complexities with wisdom that complemented his strategic thinking. Their conversations revealed intellectual compatibility that matched their emotional connection, creating partnership possibilities that transcended simple romance into genuine collaboration. The first months of their acknowledged relationship involved learning to balance public appearances that maintained corporate propriety with private intimacy that acknowledged the depth of their connection. Susan's colleagues gradually accepted the reality of their partnership while respecting boundaries that protected sensitive aspects of Kong Min's business operations from casual scrutiny. The charitable foundation they established together provided outlet for Kong Min's desire to use his resources constructively, while giving Susan purpose that connected her corporate success to broader social impact. The foundation focused on supporting victims of workplace harassment and corporate crimes, their shared experience providing authentic motivation for advocacy that transcended typical executive philanthropy. Susan's family acceptance of Kong Min required careful presentation of his legitimate business activities while tactfully omitting details about his criminal background that would cause unnecessary concern. Her parents' approval was earned through observation of his devotion to their daughter's happiness and his obvious commitment to building a life worthy of her sacrifice in choosing him over conventional respectability. The first anniversary of Susan's kidnapping became an occasion for reflection on the journey that had transformed workplace harassment into genuine love through crisis that revealed character under extreme pressure. The celebration was private and intimate, their gratitude for survival mixing with anticipation of a future built on honesty about both his dangerous past and their shared commitment to building something better together. Kong Min's proposal occurred during a quiet evening at home, his words acknowledging the unconventional nature of their relationship while expressing certainty that she represented the redemption he had been seeking without knowing how to find. Susan's acceptance was delivered with joy that encompassed not just love for him, but satisfaction with the woman she had become through surviving challenges that had tested every aspect of her character and values. Their wedding planning involved security considerations that reflected ongoing realities of Kong Min's transition away from criminal activities. Yet the ceremony itself was designed to celebrate love that had conquered workplace harassment, corporate espionage, kidnapping, and the moral complexities of choosing partnership with someone whose protection had required violence on her behalf. The future they envisioned together involved continued transformation of his empire toward complete legitimacy while building family connections that would provide stability for any children they might have. Susan's influence had already begun reshaping his business practices toward methods that generated profit through innovation rather than intimidation, her corporate expertise providing alternatives to criminal revenue streams. Think about the relationships in your own life that have required you to see beyond surface appearances to understand someone's true character, whether in your workplace, family, or friendships. Have you ever found yourself defending someone others had written off, or discovered that someone you initially misjudged actually possessed qualities that made them worthy of your loyalty and love? Susan's journey from overlooked secretary to cherished partner shows us that recognition and authentic connection often come from the most unexpected places, proving that genuine worth has nothing to do with credentials or social positioning, but everything to do with character revealed under pressure. Comment below and share which part of Susan and Kong Min's story resonated most with your own experience of finding your worth acknowledged by someone who truly saw you. The legacy of their love story would inspire other workplace harassment victims while demonstrating that authentic connection could transcend social boundaries and moral complications when founded on mutual respect and genuine commitment to each other's growth and protection. Susan Martinez had evolved from overlooked secretary into powerful partner, while Kong Min had discovered that redemption was possible for anyone willing to sacrifice their past for someone whose love made transformation seem not just possible, but essential for any future worth building together.